Hello, everyone. Well, to the viewers, I just want to quickly introduce myself before introducing my guest. So I go by Mzwa. I'm Swazi South African based in Canada, in Vancouver. I'm part of the South African Film Festival Canada Film Selection Committee. As you all know, but I think it bears repeating, all proceeds from the South African Film Festival in Canada go towards education programs for at-risk youth in South Africa, as well as for Indigenous programs here in Canada. So without further ado, I would like to invite Joshua Forrest and Laura to introduce themselves.
My name is Joshua Starr, and I am a teacher and facilitator on consent and gender inclusion and alternative masculinities. And I'm currently living in the land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, also known as East Vancouver. And it is stolen land. And thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Horowitz. I go by they, them pronouns. I'm a non-binary gender fluid person, originally from Ukraine, living in Canada, also on the coast, the land of the Coast Salish people.
My name's Forrest Mortefee. My pronouns are he, him. I'm also on Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands. I was born here, very grateful to be here. It's a beautiful sunny day. Look out my windows. I am a singer, I'm an artist, mentor, and I also like to work with energy healing. Yeah, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for sharing your time and just for signing up for this conversation. Now, the first story that I would like to just get from you in your way in is if you could just walk us through your own journey in your identity. And here we can go popcorn style. Or should I, okay, maybe I'll start off with Law.
Sure. Yeah, so I am gender fluid, non-binary. So non-binary is a big umbrella term for anyone who kind of falls outside of the gender binary. And underneath that is underneath the trans umbrella too. So I'm also a trans person, but I identify as non-binary. And within the non-binary definition, I identify as gender fluid. And for that, what that means for me is it's kind of like I kind of dance around with gender. I like to play with it on a daily basis. How I identify changes and is mutable. It's not really set in stone. And there are days that I feel more masculine, days that I feel more feminine, and days where I feel neither and more like, agender too. So how I kind of came to terms with that, well, there's a lot of, obviously it was very difficult because you never really felt like you could fit in. I also went to school. I went to an all-girls Catholic school in England with the uniform and all that, which is very regimented in a single gendered space. So it was kind of hard, but I always felt like I didn't really belong someplace. And then, over time, as I heard these terms and got to know more about the queer community and different genders, I learned that, oh, this is actually who I am. And they just kind of, these words stood out to me, these terms and how people were describing themselves, I just kind of really aligned with and realized that that's, who I've been my whole life. And I finally had the terms to describe myself.
Thank you for that. Josh, you want to go next?
So I navigate the world as a man, but that's more of a strategic decision than exactly how I feel, because I struggle with knowing exactly what English language to use as somebody who is Jewish and against Israeli apartheid. I feel like the language that I speak should be the language of my ancestors and Yiddish, and there's different gender systems and different cultures and different languages, and the man-woman binary doesn't really sit right with me, but then I see the need for positive male role models and healthy masculinities, and so I navigate the world as an anti-patriarchal trans man, and grew up not knowing that trans men existed. But I think it's probably the best fit for how I want to live my life and be seen and understood. And then also, I like to challenge the cisgender norms around what it is to be a man and what it is to be masculine, and also the heteronormative ideas around how men are supposed to act. I feel like my femme side often doesn't get seen, unfortunately. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right. I mean, you all bring up a few things I'd like to circle back to, but before moving on with that, Forrest.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, both of you. It's really nice to just like hear your stories and perspectives. For me, my journey with my identity has been complex, multidimensional. I first came out as non-binary. I didn't actually realize I was coming out at the time, but I remember saying to my partner at the time, who was a trans man, I said, you know, when I think of myself with they, them pronouns, it's like all of this anxiety that I didn't even know was there just drips off of my body. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to hold space for it at the time. And he said to me, that's because you have so much internalized misogyny. And that was the end of the conversation. And I didn't come out again for a year or two after that. But I did make my way back. I made my way out of that relationship and back to my gender expansion, and came out as non-binary in 2018 and began my social transition. And I remember it was maybe a year, or rather like a month or two after I came out as NB, that I was like, I'm a boy. And like really recognized that within myself for the first time. But I wasn't ready to take that next step in having that be part of my public expression and transition for about another year or two. And then I came out as a trans man, and started taking testosterone in 2020, got top surgery 2021. Very grateful to have access to medical transition and to have a safe social transition. Huge. Don't take that for granted. So grateful. Makes me just able to exist and live. I struggled a lot with mental health before transitioning. So it's just a totally new lease on life. I'm really grateful for. And I think considering this question is like more broadly about identity, I also want to acknowledge my spiritual identity and the fact that no matter what body or form I'm in, I don't feel that it represents my spirit. So there's kind of this piece around spiritual dysphoria that I've also explored and experienced. But that's okay. We're human, so here we are. But yeah, I guess that's what I'll share off the jump.
Thank you. Thank you all. In listening to your stories, there's this, trying to find the right words here. It's, as you are speaking power to your own truth and how you feel, how have you seen what has worked in terms of your community of people showing up and supporting you, and what hasn't worked? I'm not sure who would like to go first.
Happy to jump in.
All right.
I guess I think like what has worked for me has been people taking my word for who I say I am. When I tell people who I am, them accepting that, updating their ideas of how they see me, and using the pronouns that I've asked them to use. That has made just massive difference for me. I think the folks in my life and the friends who have been able to make that transition within their own minds about how they think about me quickly, or hopefully like ASAP right away. Like that's really given me space to continue those relationships without having them be distressing. And I think dysphoria can be gender dysphoria can be tough to understand for folks who haven't experienced it because it is like so savage. I remember reading one time these different like descriptions of what dysphoria feels like, and it's different for all of us at different times, but it can feel like just wanting to peel your skin off. It can just be absolutely excruciating. And so I think being in spaces and in relationships where I wasn't having my gender dysphoria aggravated by misgendering made the difference between relationships that I could exist within and ones that I simply had to step back from. So just to paint like that experience for folks, yeah, that's been something that's been really supportive in my journey.
No, I'd like to invite you in for a response.
Yeah, I think the best kind of support is what Forrest was kind of bringing up, is that, they get with the program, they instantly are like, oh, and because, at the end of the day, who you are to that person doesn't change. It just, their perception of you needs to, update a little bit. So I'm still the same person, and our relationship becomes like, doesn't have to change really at all because we're still friends. I just, these are my pronouns, this is who I am, and I would like to be perceived that way, because it's just, updating you. Like, it's like when you learn a friend is like, oh, I was actually born in Spain, and you're like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Like, so that kind of reaction sometimes has been really great. Obviously, you don't want it to just them to just, acknowledge it and move on as if nothing had happened, because, it is kind of a big deal, especially if a person's not like fully out. And it's also hard to kind of work up that courage if you've been misgendered to then correct them and come out like that, especially if it's not in a space that it's like gotten out of the way of at the beginning. Like if it's something you have to update over time, it takes a lot of courage to then, come out and be like, because do you trust that person? Are you safe? And so if they do say that to you, you have to kind of, respect that, it took some effort and some courage on their part to do so. So some kind of recognition of that always goes a long way. And also curiosity isn't bad. An overabundance of questions can be kind of, like not just annoying, but can kind of make, seems like it's like you're being interrogated, which you really shouldn't be for your identity. So some questions and some curiosity is natural, and it can also, spur really good conversations about, and you can make you feel like you are really understood, which is really important too.
Sure.
Yeah, I think having space to experiment can be really empowering for folks that are maybe having questions about our own gender and how we want to be described, what pronouns work, and what names will feel right for us at different points in our lives. And I think for a lot of gender diverse, trans, and two-spirit folks, it can take us sometimes months or years or decades to find names that work for us, and then we might still change them. And having that spaciousness to change our pronouns and our names maybe multiple times, maybe even a dozen times, I think allows for a personal journey of transformation. And if somebody's not making a coming out be about them, like as the person that's hearing it, but to really hold that space and honor what the person that's coming out is sharing, as opposed to whatever reaction they're having, which says more about themselves than the person sharing. I'm open to working with straight people to build up their competency around these types of things, and I'm a very patient person who's seen really incredible transformations from allies, and I think that's what the world needs right now.
Speaking of allyship, I'm curious about your own respective thoughts about building spaces where gender identity can continue to be amorphous and create room for changes and evolutions. Instead of saying, it seems to me in just a few personal circumstances I've seen, sometimes even I've struggled with kind of switching and quickly updating and getting with the program as someone's gender evolves and their identity evolves. Because it's not just in gender, it's also in our own lives. We are not in one position. We are constantly going through these different phases. So I'm curious about what ideas you have, or what practices have you seen in social spaces, in your own communities, or holding that space where transformation is allowed and growth and evolution is allowed. Like, what would you invite the audience to think about?
From a more like, organizational standpoint, and especially like in a corporate environment or in a school environment, I think establishing pronouns early on, even if you are leading a discussion and you yourself are cis, just saying, hi, my name is this, and these are my pronouns, can make it so much easier for trans people to feel comfortable to say that, because you don't want to be the first and only person to give your pronouns, because it really singles you out in a very scary way. And it doesn't feel like a safe space. So just encouraging putting pronouns in email signatures, in like attached to names, anywhere, like can make other people feel comfortable to follow suit and do the same. Actually, it's how I was able to come out with I was working with a client, and I was not talking to them that often, so it never really came up naturally, but it was always there, but no one ever acknowledged it. And then finally we got to working in a space together, and someone said, well, before we start working, let's all go around and do pronouns. And it was just primarily cis people. And that was when I finally was like, oh yeah, I'm they, them pronouns. And that's when everyone's like, oh, okay, wonderful. And we just moved on, and now my pronouns were respected. But yeah, we just didn't have the opportunity before. So weeks, it would just be a little bit of misgendering. But again, like it was just so infrequent that it didn't warrant like a stoppage of time. So, but having that one moment meant so much to just be able to smoothly and not bringing it up and cause any friction, to just be like, hey, yeah, these are my pronouns. And so as a cis person, just saying that and normalizing that can do wonders.
Someone else feel free to jump in. Thank you for that, Lo.
Yeah. Totally agree with everything you said. I think as well, I always really appreciate it when I do correct someone on my pronouns, when they thank me instead of apologizing, and then immediately move on. I think that's like a very like chill, eloquent way, and it doesn't make it as much of an emotionally laborious event for me as the person who is correcting them. I know that it can feel shitty when you misgender someone, especially when you keep misgendering a loved one. And it feels better for me as a trans person to have just a quick like, oh yeah, thank you, to say the correct pronoun and then to move on. Makes it a lot easier for me. So yeah, that's something that I will share regarding that. And like another obvious piece, I think, is like, yeah, if you have a space where there are going to be restrooms that are labeled, like just having gender neutral restrooms. Love that. Love to see it. Yeah.
I support what was said. I don't have anything to add. Thanks.
Yeah, I was thinking about that pressure of, really, I'm going to turn back to you first, about what is it about the continuous stories that just you find very taxing, and other folks can feel free to chime in on this one.
Yeah, I think because then the person who is being corrected is emotionally suffering. They're feeling guilty, they're beating themselves up. They're then going through a process that needs support from their friend who's present with them, who is the trans person who is having dysphoria triggered by being misgendered. And so again, I think it brings the focus back onto the person who is using the wrong pronouns. And then it creates a situation where, like for me, when I've had folks who are misgendering me constantly and I'm needing to correct them over and over again, it then becomes like me needing to support them. And then also it creates a situation where I might be less likely to correct them when they do misgender me, because it makes it more awkward and it creates an emotional situation out of whatever the moment is. And so I think that, like, certainly when I was in a stage of my gender journey where I was being misgendered regularly, it really increased my resilience for awkward situations and for setting clear boundaries and for standing up for myself, because it ultimately is, it's a process of boundary setting where it's like, rather, if I don't correct someone on my pronouns, then for me, that felt like a betrayal of self. Usually I would wait until they misgendered me twice. And then the second time they did, like every other time they did it, I'd be like, my pronouns are he, him, or they, them, whatever my pronouns were at the time. So rather it's, creating an emotionally distressing situation for myself or creating an emotionally distressing situation for someone else. Because I think when we are corrected, it means we did something wrong. And so there's a moment that happens there. So I think minimizing the amount of emotional labor that we are asking the trans or gender nonconforming person to do on our behalf to console us in that moment, as much as we can minimize that, it makes it so much more safe and accessible and easy for us as trans and gender nonconforming people to continuously and consistently correct folks when and if we do get misgendered. Yeah, that's what I will say.
I'd love to
Thank
add to
you.
that if I could.
Yeah, go
Especially
ahead.
because the whole sorry thing is that when people say it, it is like acknowledging that they did something wrong, and you never know how a person's going to react to that. People struggle with apologizing in general, and some people might over time then develop a resentment about it and feel like they're constantly making a mistake and then lash out about it. And when it's like, so saying thank you takes it from a negative experience to a positive one. And having multiple of those moments where you have to correct someone, if they continuously say thank you instead of sorry, then it's just continuous positive interactions versus continuous negative ones. And if you keep having the continuous negative ones, they might not realize it internally that they're associating you with those negative experiences rather than their own behavior. And that can create a lot of issues. Whereas if they're saying thank you, then it turns it into like a more positive correction. And so they can no longer fall into the pitfall of accidentally attributing negative interactions to you. And it's not negative on our part, at least. We are trying to help.
Thank you. That was well put. I am curious. I want to circle back now in the latter minutes that we have in our conversation about, you've all seen Call Me Miles, and there's many takeaways from that film. What would you hope people took away from watching and experiencing that film that they can bring into their daily practice of creating more inclusive and welcoming spaces for all of us to show up as our full, truthful human selves to ourselves? Joshua, this time I'll start with you.
I have to admit, I did not make it through the whole film. I got nervous with the content warning, and I apologize, but I did not complete the film. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you for the honesty. It's refreshing. I'll go with you, Forrest.
Well, yeah, I think one thing I would say, actually, that was like kind of to Joshua's point earlier around like ally transformations, was it was really cool to see Miles's mom's transformation. I think like it's, there's some tough moments that I have had. I'll speak for myself with family as they are adjusting. But I have seen just incredible ally transformations in my life. And so it was beautiful to see that in the film. And I think that as trans folks, having that hope for those in our lives who we really care about to transform, I think that when there's breath, there's hope. And so for those trans folks who might be watching, who might have, tougher relationships with family or be in sticky places, there's always hope. There's always hope that our allies can transform to really understand and support and respect who we are. I've certainly seen that in my life, and it's been, nice to see that in the film.
Hello?
I think especially for allies to take away from it, especially like I also wanted to point out the ally transformation that happened there, because a lot of people get afraid to try or get afraid of getting it wrong. So I've had a lot of people exit my life purely because they didn't want to have to bother and continuously trip up over themselves. And that's sad because there is a big potential for growth there. And I think, we also as human beings have a lot of, room for forgiveness. Obviously don't expect it from everyone, and don't go in believing that you have it so you can do whatever you want. But just don't make it stop you. Don't feel like you're afraid to try, because we are people, we exist. Even when you can't see us, we are here, we are partaking in society, we are taking up space, we deserve to take up space. So rather than giving up and just managing your life around it and pretending that we just don't exists outside of your small little bubble, definitely try, because even if you fail, even if it takes a long road, it's going to be a journey and we can walk it together. And I think, it was so beautiful that how the mother came out at the end, and how there is so much room for forgiveness and for love at the end of it. And if you come to every interaction with an open heart and with pure love, even if you stumble, even if your intention doesn't go the way you wanted it to, there is always a road to walk it back.
Thank you for that. And in my final question, I want to circle back to the context of North America, in particular Canada and the US. If there are any resources for allies seeking to transform to be better allies, to better understand, if you are aware of any resources or platforms that people should be looking into, or conversations that people can be a part of.
I feel like there's like some ally sheets that I've like sent to family over the years. Nothing is prepared or coming to mind at this moment directly. But yeah, I think if folks are looking to become better allies, seeking like positive resources from queer and trans people, can't be a bad place to start. And the internet's a wide place, so I'd say, hey, get after it. But yeah, I think having them like be positive and affirming is an important piece, I would say, rather than making anyone wrong or bad. Because there's a lot of noise on the internet. So I would say like look for stuff that feels, affirming and of like everybody's humanity. Because of course, like the cis and straight folks in our lives are also entitled to like their full humanity and their range of emotional experiences as well. So I think that's important that the resources they're seeking are also supportive of their journeys. And I think that also can give a space for the allies in our lives, to like process and do their own work on the sides that they're not processing directly with the trans people in their lives. In terms of like adjusting to their loved one's transition. I think that's like an important piece. But yeah, look out for those resources by queer and trans people on the internet. That's what I would say.
I love that invitation. Joshua, thoughts?
Yeah, I would be mindful of the emotional labor that we ask from individual trans people that aren't getting paid, because it can get exhausting to be expected to answer questions, and sometimes they're not respectful or comfortable for a lot of folks. And so to do one's own research online, there's lots of different resources, or to pay trans folks for their labor, I think is best practice if possible. And there's so much online that you can find on YouTube. And yeah, I think we're not familiar with talking about these things if we come from communities and cultures that aren't supportive when we're growing up. And so to invite all of us to be gentle with ourselves in that journey, and then also to challenge some of those assumptions that aren't working for supporting the gender diverse folks in our lives.
Thank you. No?
Yeah, I think doing your own research is also really big. Don't just wait for the trans person in your life to teach you everything, because yeah, again, there's a lot of emotional labor associated with that. We're on our own journeys too. We can't also manage yours. So, and yeah, the internet is a wide place. I think the one place that I have seen that it's very random, and I'm sure there's better resources out there, but I joined this Facebook group a while back called Things You Should Know About Trans People. And it's a bunch of allies and trans people in there kind of helping each other in a very safe, collaborative space, who want to know more, or who, like, you know, some trans people will post like, hey, I'm a non-binary gender fluid person, ask me anything, kind of like topics where you can ask things to these people. And the moderators there are really good with their work. There's some really good uplifting and gender euphoric stuff in there. And there's also been parents of trans kids in there asking questions to other trans people about how to go about, you know, making space for their child and managing the dysphoria and all that. So yeah, I think that's a really good space. And there's so many more communities like that, I bet, out there. So that's just one. Don't all rush to join that one. I mean, you could, but that's just the one I'm most familiar with, but I'm sure there's tons more. And yeah, definitely do your own research for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want to take this final moment to thank you all for showing up, for sharing your truth. I know this is, this isn't something that's fun for a rare sunny Vancouver day, but you all showed up and you shared, and I just want to say I appreciate it, and I think our audience will also appreciate it too. So much love.
Thank you so much. Much love.
Thank you, Mzwa.